Thank you and good morning. I think it's a brave woman that stands between a congregation and their sausages, so I am very mindful of the time that I have left. I can already smell them, which is always good, so I can see once people start just exiting out, it's time for me to wrap up. But this month has been at our church all about connecting stronger, whether it's the morning tea, the messages. We've tried to take any opportunity because we're a church that's built on relationship with God, but relationship with people, and we take that really seriously. And, you know, whether it's a kid space or enjoying sausages after the service, it's just that opportunity because in church it's so hard to get to know people. When I look at the Gospels and you kind of lift yourself above every story, what you see is these connection points that Jesus has. In fact, you could probably summarise the Gospels as just connections that Jesus has, whether it's with a crowd, whether it's with his 12, whether it's with a subgroup and the 3 that he brings closer in, and then the times that he goes away with his Father. Why is this even important for us? Because in it, there's a sense of balance. It's almost like there's a rhythm to these connections. There's a time that he's with the crowd and he knows the time to pull away. He knows the time to be with a smaller, intimate group. And I think it gives us this beautiful blueprint, if you like, of how we can do community and relationships in a sustainable way. How we know the times to be amongst the big groups, the people, when it's time to bring those who we need close into us. And most importantly, the times we need just to be alone with God. None of those are exclusive. None of those can be without the others. And I think, you know, when I think about these connection points and I think about it as a rhythm, it's almost like this dance Jesus does when he moves just seamlessly, effortlessly between the crowds and the people. But when I look at it more closely, actually it's really deliberate. It's really purposeful. None of these things are effortless and seamless. Well, they were to Jesus, but they're not for us. It will take you to want to be intentional. It will take you to want to think through the way you want to connect with people, to be able to somehow come through this year and the years to come, because I believe there's such a blessing. When God says that he wanted us to have an abundant life, I think being able to move through these and have these different experiences and these joys that each of these connections bring is a part of what abundant life looks like. And so I want to look at a couple of scriptures, and I am mindful I've probably chosen the most theologically difficult scriptures, and I'm not going anywhere near deep theology, so Mark, you can rest. The first one I want to look at is Matthew 17, and it's Jesus transfigured on the mountain. It's going to come up on the screen for us, but I'm going to read out of the New King James. Now, after 6 days, Jesus took Peter, James and John, his brother. He led them up on a high mountain by themselves, and there he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun. His clothes became white as light. And behold, Moses and Elijah appeared to them, talking with him. And Peter answered and said to Jesus, "Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, let us make here 3 tabernacles, one for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah." While he was still speaking, behold, a bright cloud overshadowed them. Suddenly a voice came out over the cloud saying, "This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. Hear him." And when the disciples heard it, they fell on their faces. They were greatly afraid. Jesus came to them, touched them. "Arise and do not be afraid." When they had lifted up their eyes, they saw no one but Jesus. Now they came down from the mountain, and Jesus said to them, "Tell this vision to no one until the Son of Man is risen from the dead." Why this story? Well, if you think about the ministry of Jesus and you think about what he came to do, I look at this personal experience that he has, if you like, his mountaintop. It's a place where he wanted to be known. He allowed himself and the disciples to see this side of him, the glory. So if we think about the transfiguration in its most simplest and my plain English, it's to see the divinity of who Jesus was. Up until now, they had experienced what the humanity of Jesus looked like. They saw a man in flesh. Yes, they heard his teaching, but there was something so special about this moment. And when I think about what Jesus was trying to accomplish, the PR exercise in me says, wouldn't this have been a good one for the crowd, Jesus? If the Pharisees, if the leaders of the day had seen Jesus with Moses, with Elijah, wouldn't that have validated him as the Messiah? If they heard the voice of God saying, "Listen to my son," would this not have converted a crowd? But instead, he chooses to share this moment with just 3. 3 disciples already following him. Somehow they were in this privileged position where they could see this little bit more of God. They could understand Jesus in his divinity, something special, something sacred. When I think about this and I think about the disciples, a couple of things that I know is it's not because they were the smartest, it wasn't because they were the best. They were just three fishermen actually. And he chose them instead of a crowd, instead of important people, to reveal something of himself. And if you think about that and hold that idea for a little while, I want to take you to another very significant moment in the life of Jesus. And that is him in the Garden of Gethsemane. Matthew 26, and I'm reading from verse 36. Then Jesus came with them to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to the disciples, "Sit here while I go and pray over there." And he took with him Peter and the two sons of Zebedee, which are James and John, and he began to be sorrowful and deeply distressed. And he told them, "My soul is exceedingly sorrowful, even to the point of death. Stay here and watch with me." He went a little further and he fell on his face and he said, "My Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours." He came to the disciples, he found them sleeping, and he said to Peter, "Could you not watch with me just 1 hour? Watch and pray, lest you be led into temptation. The spirit is willing, but your flesh is weak." And again, a second time he went away, he prayed, "My Father, if this cup cannot pass away from me, unless I drink it, then your will be done." And he came and he found them asleep, and their eyes were heavy. And so he left them, he went away again, and he prayed a third time, saying to them, Then as he came, he said to his disciples, "Are you still sleeping and resting? Behold, the hour is at hand. The Son of Man is being betrayed. Arise, let us be going, and see, my betrayer is here." Again, I would say this is Jesus as his most vulnerable. Such a pivotal moment for him. And here I see a picture more clearly. I see him bring the 12 with him to this place where he knows he needs to pray. But then I see him leave them. He separates Peter, James and John again, and he takes them a few steps further along. And there he shares with them just this little bit more about where he's at. "My soul is sorrowful, even to the point of death. Wait with me." And then he takes what I consider to be the most important steps. The steps where he leaves the disciples, he leaves the three, and he goes to a place with his Father. A place where he knows no one else can understand, no one else can be with him, no one else can do what he needs to be done. And if you like, he shows us a pattern. He shows that the three fall asleep, they let him down, and so do the disciples. And so again I say, why would I share these moments? What is the purpose of sharing moments with people who sometimes get it wrong? But I think what God is showing us is a picture that we do need to have people in our world. We need to have the 12, people who are on the same page as us, people who understand, and then to separate a small group. You know, he chose to be known in his most highest and glorified time, and he's chosen to be known at his most vulnerable by three, Peter, James and John. Now, I have no clear explanation about why it's these three, but when I think about how his calling of his disciples together starts, it starts with two sets of fishermen. It starts with two groups where he goes down to the beach, and this is so early on in his ministry. If we think about the time Jesus had just began teaching, it doesn't talk about the miracles, and he goes to the beach and he sees two sets of brothers. The first set is Peter and his brother Andrew, and the second set is referred to as the son of Zebedee, John and James. And it is these four, and I don't know what happens to Andrew, and it then becomes three, that he keeps coming back to time and time again. And I don't know, because often we think the 12 disciples were all assembled at once, but they weren't. I don't know, when he asked these fishermen just to stop and follow him, and they did so immediately, was there a sense of loyalty, was there a sense of commitment that these people knew Jesus? They were willing to just faithfully follow without seeing the miracles, without knowing too much about his ministry, that these three just keep showing up. Whatever the reason, what God is telling me, and I feel like what he wants you to get and understand this morning, is there's something about consistency. Having a group of people that you travel with, that you allow yourself to be known to. You allow yourself to be known in the good times and in the bad times. And what I learned from this is the way he does it. There's humility. There's humility in the call. He goes and he calls those disciples to himself. When he goes to the mountaintop, he invites the disciples into that space. When he goes into the garden, he separates those three and he invites them and he discloses that bit more about what he's going through. And when I apply this to our lives, I think we need to be deliberate, we need to be purposeful about having these people in our world, about being humble enough to do the inviting and the calling. How often do we sit back and go, I want to be invited, I want people to know what's going on with me, but I haven't shared anything. In my most sorrowful moments, have I invited people into that space? I love that to the best of his ability, Jesus says to those three what he needs from them. Come and wait with me. My soul is so sorrowful. Do we tell the people in our world what we need from them? Or do we hope that they're going to get it? What I'm learning here too is these disciples mucked it up more times than not. They didn't live up to the expectation. These weren't perfect people, but they were his people. I like to call them his crew. They were the originals and he stuck with them. You know, he knew from the start that Peter was going to be tempted, Judas was going to betray him, and yet he still invested in this group. How often do we sometimes go, I've been hurt before, I trusted people, I let them in and they hurt me, so now I'm just going to shut myself out. What I feel like God is saying is there's this rhythm where if we don't invest in the crowd, if we don't invest in the 12, if we don't invest in the 3, we miss out on an experience. We miss out on what God is calling us to. But like I said, the most important steps that you're ever going to take are those 3 steps or 4 steps where you leave the 3 behind, and then it's you and God. What Jesus shows us through that beautiful story of Gethsemane, and even through the story of the Transfiguration, is that it doesn't matter if you have a great group of people with you, if you do life well with your 12 and your 3, there is no substitute for that time with God. It says that he's a jealous God, and what I think now is that he's jealous for those moments. When you're experienced your highest high, he wants you to choose him to share that with. When you're in your lowest low, and I pray there will be very few of those times, that he wants you to deliberately separate yourself from the people you rely on and put yourself in a position when it's just you and God. And why do I think he wants you to do it? Not because he's cruel and he wants to isolate you, but because there's something about being known. Now, God knows you. He tells us in Scripture that from the dawn of time, he knows the hairs on your head. He knew you before you were formed. But there is something in those moments where you get to know him. In that moment, whether it's your sorrow or whether it's your highest high, you get to be accoladed by him. You get to be encouraged by him. But it takes courage to step away from the crowd. It takes courage to be stepped away from the group in order to find yourself alone with God. And so can I encourage you this morning, and I'm terrible with titles and I drive the creative team mad, that if this was going to have a title, I would say that God is calling you to adjust your rhythm. As I said at the start, that there's this beautiful dance that Jesus does. There's this movement between the crowd, between the group, between the disciples. And what he's asking us this morning and challenging us is around our own rhythms. Let me put it this way. Maybe you're comfortable in the crowd. You know, that eclectic mix of people who all believe different things. You never quite know what's going to come. It's fun, but you never quite are known by anyone. The conversations are great, they're engaging at surface, no one asks too many questions. Maybe that's the space you're the most comfortable in. But I would say to you this morning, you're missing out on having that small group that really know you, that you can rely upon when things are good and things are bad. That people are there for you, and then there's also that time with God. You don't get that from a crowd. You can't substitute that. Or maybe you're the type of people who are really comfortable in that small group. You've been Christians, you've done life together, and you've got those people that you can text, you can call at any point. Can I tell you that God still wants you to be in the crowd? It's not good enough to say, I've got my people. We've been called to be salt and light to the world. God expects us still to be comfortable in the crowd because it has its purpose. And so maybe for some of us, we need to force ourselves back out there. We've formed a little club that feels safe, where we are known and we're comfortable. Sometimes, and I've got to thank my mum for this, is I've been really lucky to have that tribe, to travel with some good Christians. But I know my mum always reminds me, sometimes, Chris, you're going to have to go to war on your own. Sometimes you're going to have to take those steps and leave those people, and it needs to be just you and God. And sometimes we can rely on, I text so-and-so for prayer, or I came up to the front for prayer, and that's all great things to do. But please don't ever let that be your reason for not going to God yourself. He wants you to come to him. He wants you to be encouraged when he speaks to you directly. We all hear from God. Can I encourage you, if any of you are in the area of discipling and you have your leaders and people under you, can I just say our job is to equip saints for ministry, not to make them dependent on us. At every opportunity, whether we're praying for them, prophesying over them, doing whatever, we need to also encourage them that they can hear for themselves, that they can access Jesus and God for themselves at any point. And then there are my favourite club who don't need people. It's just me and God. Me and God, we're good. As for the people, no good. Corrupt. I will tell you from the start of time, God has said it is not good for man to be alone. And at the end, one of the things at the second coming, it tells us we will become lovers of self and easily deceived. 2 ways of stopping ourselves from achieving either of those things is to make sure we're in community. You know, Proverbs 27:17 says, like iron sharpens iron, a man sharpens the character or the countenance of his friend. There is something about being among people, whether we think we need them or not, where we allow ourselves to be sharpened. We allow ourselves to be picked up, but we allow ourselves to be vulnerable enough to be corrected. There is safety in a group. So I would encourage you today, as I hand over back to Pastor Mark, I just want to challenge you on what is your rhythm? What is your rhythm of connection? And is Holy Spirit asking you to be open to adjust your rhythm? Because in every one of those connections, whether it's the crowd or the 12 or the 3 or the 1 with God, there is something beautiful. There is an experience to be had. There is work to be done. There is a balance of being able to receive and to give. Whether our gifts need to be used, whether we need to be the benefactor of somebody else's gifts, all of that is done by finding the dance. And as I close, I'd just like to say, I feel like some of you this morning, you're not dancing, you're not even moving. You found yourself stuck with one group, one cohort where you found safety. Could I suggest to you this morning that freedom comes from the movement? Freedom comes from being able to seamlessly move just like Jesus between all those groups. So could I just challenge you and encourage you, if that is you this morning, I know that the altar will be open for prayer, just to challenge yourself to come. Whether you need to hear from God yourself, whether you need that confidence to be able to pray and know that what you hear is correct, I'd encourage you to come and do so. Thank you.